this afterwards, but I think the smell of weed has dissipated from my office by now. I wasn't smoking in my office. We had a guest who was here during the Necessity Pantry on Wednesday, and he didn't smoke in my office either. But he, almost before he could get his name out, he said, "I'm sorry if I smell like weed, my name's Brian." I'm like, "Lead with your name, and then you can apologize if you want." But no apologies are necessary, I mean, it's legal now, so it's fine. It's actually almost more legal than smoking a cigarette is now, if you think about it. But 20 years ago, it was not. And for Brian, that was a big deal, because that's when he first got in trouble. 20 years ago, he got mixed up with marijuana and landed in jail, and then got deeper and deeper and deeper into trouble, to where he spent most of the last 20 years in one kind of jail or another. And he came to share his story with me, and he was seeking Jesus. He was here, and he wanted to share his story. He wanted some prayer. He needed some time. He needed some pastoral care. And so I was thankful to be here during that time when he came. And we talked for a while, and he reminds me in that sincerity and that intensity of needing and wanting Jesus in his life. He reminds me of the crowds in the gospel that we just read. And you see the disciples and you see the crowds. And I think it's really interesting to look at these two groups as being kind of separate, but not entirely separate. The disciples are the ones who were chosen by Jesus by name. He went out and he said, "Whatever you're doing right now, I want you to drop that and follow me." And so they did. But then they get confronted with this other group of people, these people who have heard of Jesus in advance, and so they come from wherever they're at, far and wide, seeking healing, seeking forgiveness, seeking God's presence in their lives. And we see these as two kind of different circles. If it's a Venn diagram, we're not entirely sure they overlap. The ones that Jesus said, "Hey, come and follow me," and the ones where they came to Jesus and said, "I got a problem." But I can think of one person that actually belongs in both groups. That person is Mary Magdalene. Now, we don't think of Mary Magdalene as a disciple all the time, because we kind of draw this tight circle around the 12, who were all dudes, as we know. But they were not all of Jesus' closest followers. There were others. And Mary Magdalene was one of those people. And how did she didn't find her way into this group by being called specifically by Jesus, say, "Hey, come and follow me," out of the blue. She had a very different kind of story. Now, I should step to the side real quick and say the reason why I want to talk to you about Mary Magdalene right now is that her feast day is tomorrow. We just missed it. If it had been today, we would have done the readings for the Feast of Mary, and we would have even had white here and here. But it's tomorrow, so we just missed it. But that doesn't mean I can't talk about her, because I want to talk about Mary Magdalene. How she found her way into Jesus' circle in a much more dramatic fashion. That as the Gospels record, she was possessed by 7 demons. And I even put her story in the second to last page of the bulletin. You can see that in short if you want. But her life was all but lost. She was a goner. And Jesus stepped in and just delivered her in this dramatic stroke. And all of a sudden she knows that she went in one moment from death to life. And her entire life is wrapped up in this person of Jesus in front of her who just set her free. And she followed like that. She knew that she had nothing outside of this man right here, this Messiah. And she said, "This is it for me. I am not leaving this guy's side, no matter what." And so when you look at the disciples and the way they understand Jesus' ministry, and you look at the crowds that needed healing and the way they understand Jesus' ministry, they're both getting bits and pieces. But Mary Magdalene gets the whole thing. And I think as the disciples look at the way she follows, they must be thinking of that, like, wow, I'm here. I'm with it. But I'm never going to understand the ministry of Jesus the way Mary does. Because her whole life is invested in this person. It's that story of transformation. Have I been transformed? When I follow Jesus, am I following him because this is it for me? Or is it because of some other reason? Is it because of some cultural reason or some intellectual reason? Or just habit? And when we look a little closer at Mary, another one of the names she gets is the apostle to the apostles. And that's a fact we overlook a lot too. We think too much about what she was delivered from. We think about what she was forgiven from, which may have been prostitution. We don't know. That's part of the tradition. All of these things she was released from, all these things she was delivered from. And it's like, well, Jesus set her free of those things. Are we setting her free? Or are we continuing to identify her based on her past instead of her present? And so that idea of her being the apostle to the apostles gets lost in the shuffle a little bit, but it shouldn't. We should remember that she was the one that Jesus appeared to directly, and you see that in the passage in John that I put at the end of the bulletin. Jesus appeared to Mary after he was resurrected and had a closer encounter with her than any of the disciples. And that's what makes her the apostle to the apostles. She's the one who proclaimed the resurrection of Christ to the 12. And they kind of almost believed her. They had to go run and see for themselves. But at least they took it seriously. But why? Why did Jesus appear to her? Was he, I believe Jesus is a feminist, right? But is he going out, is he gender profiling, so like passing the men by, like, no, I need a woman so that I can make a point for thousands of years? No, I don't think so. I think she was just there. She was the one who had vowed to never leave his side because of what he had done for her. While all the other disciples were afraid for their lives, they had some sense of what their lives were apart from Jesus, but she didn't. She did not run away. She stayed close. Even after he was crucified, she was at the tomb. So that when he was resurrected, who was right there? It was Mary. And so she became the apostle to the apostles because she could not forget her transformation. Even if she tried, she couldn't forget it. And that reminds me of the conversation that I had with Brian when he came in here on Wednesday. That he had been through so many ups and downs, this roller coaster of a life through the justice system, and then through coming out of that and owning his own tow truck and his towing business and having $150,000 in the bank, as he said, and things were going really well, and then his client dropped him for no reason. And all of a sudden, things start going down for him to where he's in trouble again, he's broke again, he's in prison again. He told me the story of the mother of his children, who, not that long ago, took her own life. And dealing with the grief of this and trying to be there for her as she was spiraling downward. And as a result of that compassion, his own girlfriend left him, as she didn't understand what was going on. So he finds himself alone. He finds himself living with his mother, but now his mother is suffering from mental illness, and she's calling up and canceling his storage contracts and all of these things to strand him financially. Now, I don't know. I only heard one side of the story. But what I heard very clearly is that here's somebody who knows what it means to be transformed and transformed again. And as we talked, the solution became clear. This had happened to him before. He had been up here, and he'd been down here before, and he'd been up here again, and he sees how it goes. Every time that he climbs out, it's Jesus. It's his faith. He didn't have a personal formula of do X and then Y and then Z and you'll be back in the game again. He knew it was his faith. He just needed to be reminded. And I think if we're going to boil everything that we do in church, in Christianity, down to one thing, it's to remember. To remember. I feel like our faith gets dismembered throughout the week. And whatever it is that happens to us, it sort of takes all the pieces apart. And we find on Saturday or Sunday morning or whatever that we have the pieces kind of lying there in front of us. And what do? We remember it. We remember the ways that we have been delivered. Identify those things in your life. I've done that. And I try to keep coming back to it. Look at those things that you know only exist in your life because of grace, because of a miracle, because of the compassion of someone else, because of a prayer that's been answered. And use that as a totem to remember. Remember the ways that you've been healed. Remember the ways that you have been forgiven by other people and by God. All of these things throughout a life that just get forgotten. And Mary Magdalene, even she was at the risk of forgetting, but I don't believe she ever did, because her deliverance was so unforgettable. And that as Brian and I talked, he came around to this realization that this isn't the end of his story. He's had a lot of ends in his story that didn't turn out that way. They turned into middles. Whatever it is you're going through right now, this is not the end of your story. This is the middle. What does the end look like? I've quoted him before, but I'll do it as often as possible. John Lennon says, "It'll all be good in the end. And if it's not good, it's not the end." Amen.